Good afternoon. Yesterday I talked about Adyashanti. I mentioned him a little bit, and that he gave me, pretty much gave me, or I borrowed, thank you Adya, the intimate experience with being. Finding those words just resonated, and I adopted them as my own, with the caveat of remembering to give credit where credit's due. Again, Adyashanti. And something else that he said that gave me pause to think was, again, using his words, an endless state of becoming. I touched on this yesterday, but I want to continue in this vein today. This endless state of being, or this endless state of becoming, is life itself, as I mentioned yesterday. Now, having brought up Adyashanti and the influence he's had on me, I believe I shared it in other videos that in December of 1996 or January of 1997, I had an opportunity at the University of Hawaii at the East-West Center to be in an intimate gathering with featuring Adyashanti. And according to what I've heard him say recently, this was just in the beginning of his teachings. And so I've had a kind of watched him mature into his Buddhahood through many years. Haven't had occasion to see him in person again, but I've followed his videos for all these years. And what struck me when I attended in person was his pregnant pauses. When we first were all settled in the room, he didn't utter a word. He's on the stage, sitting in a chair, and with his eyes closed, perhaps gathering his forces, preparing all of us to listen and absorb as much of his lessons as we individually were able. And then he opened his eyes and he just took a survey of the room. And the silence, this pregnant silence, got to the point where it was painful. We're socially trained to fill up the empty spaces if conversation drops. And there's a silence that grows perhaps to uncomfortable character. Someone will say something. We're all trained socially to behave this way. So it was interesting. And he began with a very simple introduction, perhaps hello, the simplest introduction, or maybe hi, and proceeded for the next 90 minutes to give us a talk. And I went with a dear friend, Jessica humble to attend. And when it came time to put a microphone, set up a microphone for questioners, she was quick to become first in line. And the words out of her mouth before prefacing her question was, I've never had the opportunity to meet an enlightened being before. And he smiled, but then he said, maybe you have, but you just didn't realize. You just didn't know. And that was my introduction to this man as he addressed a dear and close friend. Left an lasting impact. And enough of what he said resonated or rang true with me that never wanted to be a follower. I wasn't interested in joining his group and sitting at his feet. But I was definitely open to what he had to say. And just a few days ago, I listened to something about paradox when he talked about paradox. And I'll tell you, this was about 45 minutes. And after we got through the first half an hour, loaded with useful, insightful. I just love how he uses that language. But after 30 minutes, the last 15 minutes, the talk went to a higher level. It was almost as if he was channeling, certainly connected to his higher self. And those last 15 minutes were transcendent. As we say in Hawaii, chicken skin, little goosebumps. Needless to say, it touched me deeply. And I've talked about sorrow and suffering as being misunderstood or misinterpreted precepts from the Buddha, insights, teachings. And I came to see that the sorrow, the suffering that we have is somehow knowing intuitively deep down within that we had forgotten something. We had forgotten our universality, our connectedness. We had, with the help of our brain and our feelings, developed kind of a protective cocoon, an ego, a misidentification as self being separate. But it was this longing, this taste, this acknowledgement way in the Netherlands of your brain, way down or in your heart. You knew that you were missing something. You knew that you needed to come home. And this idea of coming home, longing for some level of existence, some level of understanding that you felt safe, secure. You entered a state of non-questioning. perhaps in the face of a life of constant questioning. And my feeling was that it was here, my intuit, my gut, my self saw this as the source of longing, the source that of sadness, depression, sorrow, suffering, was knowing that there was something missing. And knowing, intrinsically knowing, that only we had the key. Someone could perhaps remind us and point the way, but it was totally up to each and every one of us to find their way. And this is part of what makes us unique spiritual entities. We have our different paths. We definitely have a personality that is part and parcel of this package, this physical form. It's much deeper than psychological self or egoic sense of self. Personality sticks with us. It's what's left upon awakening. It's this individuation that makes that's such a beautiful thing. And this is the paradox Adyashanti was talking about, the paradox that we're part of a whole. There's no division and separation, but each of us maintains a unique expression of infinity, identifiable, while completely understanding the non-dividuality of being, perfected being. So this is a paradox, and a paradox that is among many. In fact, all the polarities or potential paradoxes, and it's part of the process of awakening. For me personally, it occurred in the 1.5 to 2 day experience where you reconcile diametrically opposed perceived conditions, where you could look at, my favorite analogy is free will and destiny. You can look and say, yes, we all have free will. And at the same time, I'm able to support, grasp, wrap my mind around its opposite, that destiny. Destiny runs true and strong throughout our existence. And the response for me, and the response I've heard, besides being an aha moment, what I've heard others say is what happened to me. I laughed. This is the great belly laugh. The joke of the universe. That diametrically opposed conditions, phenomenon, are both equally true and part and parcel of each other. It's a 300-degree. And I used to say circle, but I like sphere so much because it adds the third dimension. So recently in this paradox, Adyashanti was talking about the endless state of becoming. This is life, the life force, the energy that seems to be separated, seems to be begun at birth and ends at death. In that whole period of time, you're in this state of becoming. Until the day when you learn to just be. Getting to this state involves first forgiveness of oneself initially, that expands to forgiveness of one and all for any perceived or real slights that you had experienced. Forgiveness. But it's predicated, you cannot forgive anyone else until you learn to embrace, forgive, and accept what you might judge, what you might evaluate as shortcomings. So this state of forgiveness then comes surrender. And surrender, like every other action, is not a one-time thing. I remember being at some lectures of my teachers where somebody got up and said, I surrendered, and I laughed and I thought, yeah, that was yesterday. You need to surrender on a daily basis, or even once you learn to be more perceptive on a continual, ongoing basis. Just as forgiveness that turns out to have no beginning and no end, so too does surrender. And through the banishment of fear, that forgiveness and surrender inevitably lead to, the largest fear being the fear of death. So forgiveness, surrender leads to, I don't want to say banishment of fear. It's the clarity that comes when you really get it, that there is nothing to fear. It's simply an instrument of your egoic, of your psychological self to bind you to its will. And Adyashanti said this endless state of becoming was a source of suffering. This is a little bit different than how I said it, than how I framed it. As well it should be. But I liked, it resonated, it felt good. And now my words, this endless state of becoming leads one or causes one to experience a constant edge of chaos. This is closely linked with fear. The fear if we don't do something, if we don't will something, that everything will collapse into chaos. And it's about control, isn't it? I find chaos, the concept of chaos, of being in chaos, of seeing a chaotic universe as a source of comfort. Rather than a source of fear. Needless to say, how we look at chaos matters not in the grand level of universal chaos. But within chaos is order, two more diametrically opposed dimensions which are in the same sphere. So within order, just like the yin and yang, once again, within order is the seed of chaos, the dot, the black dot in the white half circle. And in the black half circle of order lies a white dot of chaos. So the conditions we find ourselves in life are not in our powers to change. I'm talking about the grand conditions, the big picture. On a lower personal level, there indeed is many things. The taming of emotive outbursts, anger, jealousy, hate. Start to let them go. And if you can't completely banish them in one fell swoop, never mind. Just be aware when you're entering the realms of greed, chaos, lying, guilt, judgment. Begin to recognize and work to liberate yourself from the debilitating effects of holding on to such negative constructs. And love. Love is what comes after forgiveness. Surrender. You surrender into a constant state of love. And this is the path of bhakti yoga, the devotional. These are the ones that practice seva. Of course, all of us can practice seva. Efforts to help anonymous, maintaining a state of anonymity in seva adds to their import and impact, consequent consequential impact. The selflessness, selfless service. And when we're talking about selfless, we're talking, of course, about the psychological, the egoic sense of self. Again, this is bhakti, devotion, unlimited love. And the reward for this, the chanting of mantras, the reading or chanting of sutras, the repetition of your guru, your teacher's name. All of these are part of the practice of bhakti yoga. This is the path for lovers. This is the path for people who, on the most part, have very few questions right from the beginning. Questions are replaced with the ability to accept guidance, to accept teachings, to accept the sacred impact of sounds. So if you're a lover, there you go. If you're a man, a woman of action, we have karma yoga. Work, deeds, actions. Well meant, well executed. Again, acting without expectation. This selfless action. And then if you got questions, your mind is always busy, you have jhana yoga, the transformation of information to knowledge, to ultimate wisdom. And then there is the traditional, disciplined Raja Yoga, the royal path, where you set out to control the mind with the ultimate goal of silencing it so that you can enjoy clarity. So Raja Yoga rewards you with clarity. Bhakti Yoga is compassion, and the ultimate expression of compassion is bliss, an endless state of being in grace, a state of grace, a state of bliss. Jhana Yoga is equanimity. And Karma Yoga, the path of action, work, and deeds, is peace, the ultimate experience of peace. To become a completely peaceful being. So this endless state of becoming, rather than seeing this as a negative, we should embrace it for the truly beauty of what life is, the fire, the spark. take a look at the nature of what it means to live. We start in a seed. A seed of potentiality. A seed that has the spark of life within. The expression of that seed is whatever individuated destination that seed has. What was its source? And it allows the growth, the rigorous growth that reaches a midpoint that signals the second half of life, whether a plant or a human being. We have the vigor of youth and whatever the getting old offers. As compensation, you lose the vigor, but you have the life experience. Then we flower and bloom, producing seeds as we leave life. So the cycle of existence is continuing. It's only our limitations as a human being to see this as a constant state of becoming, when it's actually simply is. So along with the banishment of fears, along with the fear of death, along with the constant, endless state of becoming, instead of producing fear, anxiety, you embrace the peace, joy, bliss, clarity, equanimity that comes with experiencing the universal, the sameness, the oneness of each and every one of us. And if you're looking for a place to start, I would be so humble to suggest just let it go.